Tonight, getting aid to Gaza.
We want to see that work continued, which is why it is so important that the United Nations take this matter seriously.
The pushback over how the United Nations is handling humanitarian aid in the Israel-Hamas war. Plus, the CEOs of top social media companies take the hot seat on Capitol Hill, why lawmakers are questioning the dangers posed to kids on social media. And
we are in a situation where growth is held steady and inflation has been coming down.
What to expect from the economy this presidential election year. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The role of tech companies in protecting kids online. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jenna Browder.
And good evening in Washington. I'm John Jessup. Welcome to Faith Nation. Well, they're common household names, especially with kids. And today, the heads of those social media companies popular with teens, including TikTok and Facebook, were at the U.S. Capitol, there to answer tough questions about how their platforms may be harmful to children.
The explosive hearing focused on sexual exploitation of kids through social media and whether companies made protecting kids or protecting themselves the priority. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka joins us now with the details of the tension-filled meeting. Matt?
Well, John and Jenna, the issue over protecting minors online was about as bipartisan as it gets on Capitol Hill, as the social media CEOs face tough questions from both sides of the aisle.
I was sexually exploited on Facebook.
I was sexually exploited on Instagram.
I was sexually exploited on X.
This is my daughter, Olivia.
This is our son, Matthew.
Look at how beautiful Miriam is.
My son Riley died from suicide after being sexually exploited on Facebook.
Family members held up pictures as the big tech CEOs heard members of Congress accusing them that their social media products severely harmed and in some cases led to the deaths of children.
Mr. Zuckerberg, you and the companies before us, I know you don't mean it to be so, but you have blood on your hands. You have a product. You have a product that's killing people.
The focus of the grilling, social media content containing sexual exploitation of children across various platforms. The hearing also veered into how those apps police, or in many cases, don't police content that could cause a child to harm themselves.
We deploy a wide array of techniques that work across every surface on our on Discord. I mentioned we recently launched something called Teen Safety Assist, which works everywhere, and it's on by default for teen users. That kind of acts like a buddy that lets them know if they are in a situation or talking with someone that may be inappropriate, so they can report that to us and block that user.
Mr. Citron, if that were working, we wouldn't be here today.
Your platforms really suck at policing themselves.
And in maybe the most memorable moment of the hearing, Missouri Senator Josh Hawley put Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg on the spot, compelling him to face the families in the audience.
Senator, our job and what we take seriously is making sure that we build industry-leading tools to find harmful content,
make money,
take it off the services,
to make money,
and to build tools that empower parents.
So you didn't take any action. You didn't take any action. You didn't fire anybody. You haven't compensated a single victim. Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. There's families of victims here today. Have you apologized to the victims? Would you like to do so now?
Well,
they're here. You're on national television. Would you like now to apologize to the victims who have been harmed by your product? Show them the pictures. Would you like to apologize for what you've done to these good people?
And it wasn't just sexual content. Other senators questioned how much self-harm pictures or videos are being splashed across social media, while Texas Senator Ted Cruz questioned TikTok's CEO over whether or not that platform had an anti-Israel bias. John, Jenna?
Matt, so what comes next? The CEOs clearly seem to feel the wrath of lawmakers and the victims' families, but now what?
Well, there are multiple bills out there aimed at curbing what's called CSAM, or child sexual abuse material, with some of them centered around litigation. The Stop CSAM Act would allow victims to sue the social media companies, and the SHIELD Act would allow the DOJ to more easily go after people online who share the explicit material. Now, both the CEOs of Snap and X said they would support the SHIELD Act. The other CEOs, non-committal. Jenna?
All right, Matt Galka, thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. Well, overseas tonight, as the war in Gaza rages on, negotiators in the Israel-Hamas war are now closer to a deal to release hostages and stop the fighting than at any time since the collapse of the ceasefire back in December.
The two sides weighing a three-stage ceasefire. It would include releasing hostages in Gaza, beginning with a 6-week ceasefire. That's according to a draft agreement sketched out this week in Paris by international intelligence chiefs. The deal would also involve the exchange of Palestinian prisoners held in Israel. The progress comes as the State Department is reportedly reviewing options for the possible recognition of a Palestinian state. Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer was in Washington today to discuss plans for post-war Gaza. Meanwhile, a group of activists and protesters gathered near the humanitarian aid crossing in Israel today. They're calling for stopping aid deliveries to people in Gaza, while more than 100 hostages are still being held by Hamas. And in Jerusalem, the mothers of IDF soldiers gathered outside the U.S. Embassy, calling on President Biden to stop humanitarian aid shipments with the goal of bringing home the hostages and ending the war.
No further aid should be allowed into Gaza. What they are calling humanitarian aid is actually fuel for Hamas and the terrorists in Gaza.
All this as the tensions in the region rise ahead of an expected counterattack by the U.S. in response to an Iran-backed drone strike Sunday that killed three U.S. service members and injured more than 40 others in Jordan.
Well, Secretary of State Antony Blinken met today with a senior United Nations official to discuss humanitarian support for Gaza. The United States and several other countries recently suspended funding for the UN agency for Palestine refugees, commonly referred to as UNRWA. Israel accuses a dozen of the agency's staff of participating in the October 7th Hamas attack and claims 10% of UNRWA workers are associated with the terror group, an issue highlighted Tuesday on Capitol Hill.
I wasn't shocked. Many members of this committee who have worked on UNRWA reform for years weren't shocked. Terrorism support and subsidy for UNRWA is a feature, not a bug. The organization is built from its core mission, its mandate, to indoctrinate generation after generation to hate Jews, to destroy Israel.
Christians United for Israel, or CUFI, is the largest pro-Israel organization in the United States. They are calling on President Biden to permanently defund UNRWA. Sandra Hagee-Parker is chairwoman of the CUFI Action Fund, and she joins us now. Sandra, welcome. So Richard Goldberg with FDD, we just heard say support for terrorism is a feature, not a bug of UNRWA. Let's start with your reaction to that.
I couldn't agree more. You cannot lease peace from people that have institutionalized hatred. Hating Israel is the only commodity of UNRWA. Terror is the only output. I think we need to understand clearly what this pause in humanitarian aid actually means. We're talking about $300,000 that will no longer be sent to UNRWA as a result of this pause. $121 million has been sent since October, with over $1 billion having been sent since 2021. This is like withholding the straw after you have already broken the camel's back. The question should be, why did we restart funding UNRWA in the first place? We should not pause. We should eliminate all funding to UNRWA.
Sandra, CUFI is joining others in calling on the administration to permanently defund UNRWA. Sandra, how likely do you think that actually is?
Well, one would hope that in light of the horrific events of 10/7, that they would actually be willing to have an honest conversation about UNRWA and its purposes. Most people don't realize that UNRWA was specifically set up after the War of Independence in 1948 as a way to help the 700,000 people that were displaced as a result of that war. However, the United Nations already has relief works for refugees. You have about 18,000 staff that deal with 100 million refugees globally. Why do we have a separate office only dealing with Palestinian refugees? The answer to that is because the definition of a Palestinian refugee is its own definition. It is not a standard that the United Nations use to define any other refugee other than a Palestinian refugee. And that definition is designed not to resettle people that were displaced as a result of a war. It is designed to recruit people to become refugees in perpetuity. Since 1950, you have gone from 700,000 refugees to roughly 5.9 million refugees. The United States has given UNRWA over $7 billion. Not one refugee has been resettled. All we have done is recruit. So one would hope that we would look at the United Nations and say, if there is a refugee problem, it's because you have created it.
Sandra, I'd like to get your reaction to some news we got today. The State Department reportedly reviewing options to recognize a Palestinian state. About a minute left, but I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Thank you. I think that recognition of a Palestinian state on the heels of 10/7 is rewarding Hamas for massacre. The only reason that you take innocent elderly women, men, children, babies, and toddlers hostage and hold them in 350 miles of terror tunnels, that's longer, by the way, than the London Tube, is so that you can negotiate with people who actually value life and peace when the enemy only cares about your destruction. Again, you cannot lease peace from people that are not reliable partners in this process. They do not want peace. They want the total and utter destruction of the nation of Israel.
All right, we are going to have to leave it there. Sandra Hagee-Parker with CUFI, thank you so much for your time and your insights tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Well, a stark new warning from the head of the FBI, Director Christopher Wray, sounding the alarm on China and its use of cyber hacking. Wray, who testified on Capitol Hill today, says China is not only focused on U.S. political and military targets, but on critical infrastructure, too.
China's hackers are positioning on American infrastructure in preparation to wreak havoc and cause real-world harm to American citizens and communities if and when China decides the time has come to strike.
Wray warning of a cyber onslaught by Chinese hackers who he says are actively attacking U.S. economic security, stealing everything from personal and corporate data to technological innovation. His testimony comes as a report from CNN reveals Chinese President Xi promised President Biden during a meeting in November that China would not interfere in the 2024 presidential election.
Coming up, Republican blowback for a plan to secure the border. We head to Texas for the latest on the migrant humanitarian crisis when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back. Although it's not a done deal yet, the Senate's bipartisan border deal is dead in the House, even as senators on both sides of the aisle near an agreement on a long-awaited bipartisan border deal. House Speaker Mike Johnson called it a non-starter. Delivering his first speech on the floor as Speaker, he placed the focus on the humanitarian crisis on the U.S.-Mexico border.
The fallout goes on and on and on. And I am here this morning to beg of my colleagues to help us force the administration to take action. We have to stop this now and put Americans and Americans' border security first.
At a House Republican roundtable today, Speaker Johnson added that it's not a sustainable situation. Without seeing all the details of the pending deal, Johnson said the Senate bill, which ties border funding to foreign aid for both Ukraine and Israel's war with Hamas, saying it doesn't do enough to secure the border. Well, CBN contributor Chuck Holton is in Eagle Pass, Texas tonight. We turn to him now. Chuck, welcome to you. So the border town now represents the epicenter of the constitutional showdown between the federal government and the state of Texas. Chuck, how tense is the mood there now?
Well, actually, it's kind of like a movie set behind me. This is Ashley Park back here, and you can see the National Guardsman down there with his Humvee. They put up a lot of razor wire all along this area, which if you'd been here in December, there were thousands of people in this park. And the thing is, everybody's talking about this clash, this conflict between the state of Texas and the National Guard and the Border Police or the Border Patrol and the federal government on the other hand. The thing is, there's a boat dock right here in Ashley Park where Border Patrol are able to go right in and launch their boats. So they're not being kept out of the park. They're just being kept from tearing up the fencing that was put in by the National Guard. And so if you go a half a mile either direction from here, there are places where people can still cross the river and get right across. But this has become the political focal point for the upcoming election on both sides.
Yeah. While the standoff continues, what are you seeing on the ground in terms of the humanitarian crisis, Chuck?
Well, the flow from Mexico coming across right here is actually down quite a bit. And people are saying that that's because President Biden went to Mexico in December and met with Mexican President Manuel Lopez Obrador. And they came up with sort of a secret deal to get Mexico to slow walk the people that are coming north through their country into the United States. And we don't know all of the terms of that deal, but according to the Center for Immigration Studies and Todd Bensman, some of them may have been up to $20 billion in aid for Mexico and up to 800,000 of the visas for Mexican citizens to come across into the United States. But again, none of that has been shared by the State Department or the Biden administration. The bottom line is there are still lots and lots of places where people are crossing the border illegally, but Shelby Park isn't one of them.
Chuck, as we just mentioned, the bipartisan Senate deal is expected to roll out any day now. You hear on both sides of the aisle the politicking before the details are even announced. So, Chuck, what do you think, as someone who's been to the border many times, needs to be included in any bill in order for it to actually work?
Well, I think what makes the bill a non-starter is the fact that it still allows up to 5,000 migrants a day to cross the border illegally into the United States. And that's kind of the whole point of trying to close the southern borders to keep that from happening. When I started reporting on the border back in, 2004 or so, having 5,000 people a day coming across the border would have been a record beyond all records. Having 1,000 people a day come across the border back then was a crisis. And so 5,000 a day might be down from the 12,000 a day that they saw back in December, but it's still not much of a solution.
Yeah. We know a lot of Christian aid groups are answering the biblical call to minister to the foreigner among us. Chuck, talk about some of the work that's being done there in Eagle Pass.
Well, you've heard about the trucker convoy that's coming from Virginia Beach all the way to the southern border. And I got the chance to talk to some of the people that are, sort of counseling them as they come down here, not the commander or anything like that, but just people who are doing the liaison work to try to liaise with the local police here in this area to keep anything bad from happening. And what they say is that this convoy is actually made up of Christians, and it was originally meant to be a prayer rally right here in Eagle Pass, Texas. But it's sort of grown from there. Now they're up to about 70 vehicles that are coming from Virginia Beach that have made their way down through Florida and coming into Texas today. And so far, everything they plan to be safe and just support the law enforcement down here as best they can.
All right. CBN contributor Chuck Holton, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us, Chuck.
Thanks, Chuck. From inflation to interest rates, up next, we break down the day's economic news. In economic news tonight, the Federal Reserve has announced it will hold interest rates steady for the fourth straight time, with many on Wall Street eagerly anticipating rate cuts later in 2024 as inflation gets closer to the Fed's 2% target rate.
And this follows the International Monetary Fund upgrading its 2024 global growth forecast. CBN's Abigail Robertson joins us now. Abigail, it also comes as American consumers project more confidence.
That's right, John. And fears over a possible U.S. recession seem to be starting to fade, with recent U.S. economic reports displaying strong resilience, leading the IMF to also predict a soft landing for global growth.
With inflation declining steadily and growth holding up, the chance of a soft landing has increased.
The IMF's chief economist warns, however, the expansion remains slow and risks remain.
Maybe if central banks remain too tight for too long, there could be a slowdown in economic activity, or if there is a tightening of financial conditions, or if there is another round of supply shocks, for instance, there could be downside to the global economy. But there can also be upside to the global economy. Inflation could be continuing to come down back toward targets.
At the end of 2023, the U.S. economy grew higher than anticipated, while consumer spending in December also rose.
We were seeing maybe inflation being very persistent. There were a lot of concerns about the fact that the fight against inflation would potentially bring a recession. And 1 year later, we are in a situation where growth has held steady and inflation has been coming down. So that's certainly a very good development.
Still, some experts warn the U.S. may not be out of the woods yet, with certain sectors of the economy slowing due to the Federal Reserve's interest rate increases to fight inflation.
Inflation is still too high. Ongoing progress in bringing it down is not assured, and the path forward is uncertain.
And many financial experts predict the economy may cool a bit this quarter amid high interest rates, but believe the chances of a recession have decreased as inflation moderates.
Abigail, some economists had expressed optimism that stronger than expected growth in the fourth quarter GDP reported might actually lead the Fed to start slashing interest rates. Did Fed Chairman Powell suggest whether that might happen anytime soon?
Well, John, many think that these rates will be cut in 2024. And today, Powell indicated that he does not see them making the decision to cut rates at their next meeting in March, but possibly later this year.
All right, Abigail Robertson, we'll just have to wait and see. Well, thanks so much, and we'll be right back after the break.
Finally tonight, a moment of crisis met with fervent prayer.
That's right. Leaders from around the world traveled right here to the nation's capital today to pray for America, Israel, and the world. The national gathering for prayer and repentance was held at the Museum of the Bible in Washington. House Speaker Mike Johnson joined other lawmakers, evangelical leaders, and prayer intercessors.
I pray, and you'll hear my colleagues come up here in turn. We'll be praying to the Lord, and that's what is on our hearts, that the Lord would give us all discerning hearts to govern, to distinguish between right and wrong, to walk in His ways, and to obey His statutes and commands.
All right, thanks for watching.
Have a great night.